This is Abe Friedtanzer from Jewcy, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with Caroline Aaron, who is the original Mrs. Maisel. That means Shirley on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. How are you today, Caroline?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I love this show. It's so fun. It's so nice to have it back after such a long time off the air.
Right.
Do you remember how the show was first described to you when you heard about it before season one?
Um, I, they sent me the pilot. I don't know if they described it to me. They sent me the pilot. Shirley and Moish were not in the pilot, so I could get an idea of the show. And I became a fan of the show before I became a member of the cast because I was so astonished by how beautiful it was and how funny it was and how important it was. I think it really is, it's that spoonful of sugar that is really giving us something to think about in terms of women and what they have to go through to take their place in the world, certainly at that period of time. So that's what I love about it. It's about a dreamer. And that's what we all are.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful way of looking at it. And I think there are definitely some very powerful and strong-willed women who usually have a say over the men in a lot of cases, even if society is telling them that's not how it's supposed to be in that era.
That's right. That's how, yeah, exactly. Particularly Shirley, because she is involved in her husband's business. She's involved with their money in as wacky a way as it is, but she's not just decorative. And I think in society, women were more decorative than effective, but within this series, all of the women in one way or another are trying to take their place in the world.
I like that a lot. And what do you relate to most about Shirley as a character?
Well, what I relate to her most is I've said this before, but it continues to be true and continues to be delightful. This is the first character that I've ever played where people come up to me and go, "You remind me of my mother or my sister or my aunt or my original babysitter or a teacher or whatever." But it's always somebody that they remember with love. Is that people just really love Shirley, except probably her children. But isn't that always the way? I mean, I had an aunt in my life, and her daughters just found her so impossible, and I found her just so delightful. She wasn't my mother, in a way, but I think what I relate to about Shirley the most is that she's a lover. She loves the people she loves in such a big way. And how do you express that love? With food and salt. That's the way you do it. So I do relate to that. I love to feed people. I love to entertain, and I love to love the people I love. So yes, that Shirley and I have in common.
That's great. And while she's not the professional matchmaker in the extended family, she definitely is trying to do her own share of matchmaking for her son in season 4, which is a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. It's true. I think she just wants her son to be happy. And I think she thinks that he's got it all wrong. The bar is too high. You don't need to be this specific. You just, you go on the arc 2 by 2. And he's a 1 right now, and she wants him to be a 2.
That's funny. And the best part for me is that there's an overwhelming amount of Jewish content on this show. It's just so embedded within it. But I know that you have some non-Jewish co-stars playing some of those roles. Is there ever a point where stuff needs to be explained from the script?
And not once in the last 4 years has that ever come true. We do have an advisor on the set when there are Jewish holidays and stuff like that to make sure the production design is right. Are the candles in the right place? Is that, are the religious objects placed the right way? And it's so funny because my daughter gave me as a present recently a book that she found in a used bookstore called How to Act Jewish. And I thought I'll give it to all the non-Jewish actors on the show because there's been so much discussion about, being qualified to play these parts. But it turns out this was a PhD dissertation that was made into a book. And the conclusion from everything I read, it's the history of Jews in the entertainment business, is that there's not just one way to be Jewish. There's so many other ways. So when we would have like a Yom Kippur scene or something, all the Jews on the set would go, "No, you don't have to do that. Yes, you do have to do that." It just depended on the tradition that you were from. I was brought up in the South. So the way we observed the holidays and different things that we did were very, very different. So we come to a consensus in terms of how it's going to be presented for Maisel, but also within these two families, the Weissmans and the Maisels are two very different Jewish experiences in New York in the 1950s. There is the deeply assimilated Weissmans, as I who want to pass. Um, and I think that Moish and Shirley are closer to that immigrant experience where their sense of their culture is still very important to them. And they are very excited to be a part of building this new world in America. So I think that that's even, you feel that no matter what the ethnicity is. Here in New York, there's so many neighborhoods that are occupied by a particular ethnicity, and they'll be the old and the new, always together. So I think we have that going on in the show too.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I know that you have some Mizrahi and Sephardic heritage of your own. Do you see any of that is there anything in the show that relates to that? And would you like there to be? Is there some way it could be part of that?
Well, I think, isn't that so funny? Is that the Sephardic, like as an example, I'll use this as an example. I and my brother and sister were all named after living relatives. And I didn't know until I grew up that in the Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, you weren't supposed to name after anybody who was alive. So when I had children of my own, I had so enjoyed knowing the people that I was named after. My parents were very deliberate. My name is Caroline Sidney. I was named after my grandfather who lived with us. And it was so wonderful to share. Sidney was Sidney, and Caroline was his sister and a remarkable woman in her own right. And she was so excited when I was born that she was going to have a namesake. She was childless herself. And so, between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi, there are different laws, different traditions. And I think this is clearly an Ashkenazi family. I don't think there's any room for this. This show is so packed. It's so dense with so many things. I think, if it were to go on for another 20 years, we could maybe bring that up. But I think right now they're already, the Tumblr is so full at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And one of my favorite moments from the season is when Moish gets this aliyah that he's supposed to be doing for a bar mitzvah boy. He says he couldn't pick out of a lineup. And I love that Abe is the one correcting, Abe is correcting the way he's doing the aliyah, which I think is hilarious. But I'm sure that synagogue sanctuary scene was a lot of fun to film.
Oh, it was so fun. And I think the year before we had been there on Yom Kippur, and I had all this food in my purse, and people were just hovering around me, bees to honey kind of thing, because everyone was starving. I know, wasn't that so great? And then Moish was so disappointed with that bar mitzvah ceremony. And when you tune in to the next two episodes, you'll see why. We won't give it away here.
And what is it like filming a show that's set in the 1950s? Does the set really feel like you're in that time?
You are the clothes. Once you put on the clothes, and not only the clothes that you see, but we are also in terms of authenticity, because the show is so deeply authentic. We have on all the underwear. I mean, I'll walk in one day and I'll say to the dresser, do I have to wear the girdle today? It's not even that tight of a dress. Yes, the costume designer wants you to wear the bra, the girdle, the stockings, the garter belt. I mean, women must have been so uncomfortable. I don't know if you remember in season 1, Midge sets her alarm to wake up early to put on makeup before her husband gets up. So women's decorative opportunities in terms of their men, their households, their families was a very important part of who they were. And every time we get dressed and we walk onto that set, two things happen to me. I miss my mother, and I think about all the clothes I gave away that I should never have given away. But I'll tell you, I did this red carpet event recently for the launch of season 4. We were at Bryant Park. It was freezing. And the stylist who had dressed me said, do you have any gloves? And I remembered that I had a pair of black kid gloves that were my mother's, that were long gloves. And I have this whole collection of her gloves. And I said to the costume designer, I forget to cherish these objects, from the 50s, because she's scrounging the world for hats and gloves and purses and all the things that were part, and handkerchiefs that were all part of a woman's wardrobe. And not so long ago. And now I'm, the things I have, I'm going to take care of, because they're disappearing. It's just unbelievable how much women went through. I just thought, did any of them ever go to the bathroom? Because it's like, really, it's a real architecture under those clothes, let me just say.
Yeah, wow. And another really memorable scene from this season that I enjoyed was the Wonder Wheel from the premiere. What was it like to do that one?
Let me just say, first I'm going to talk about it as an audience member, because I just saw it the other day and I was it's just astonishing. You have to remember this is also during a pandemic.
Right.
Coney Island wasn't even open. No people were even allowed to go there. And we started it at the beginning in the winter on a sound stage. Amy, the director and writer genius, had taped out the whole routine of just walking through Coney Island before we got to the Wonder Wheel. And she would do it a million different ways. When would I come up with the popsicles? When would Abe be walking with the kids? How? So it was almost choreographed. That part was choreographed, but of course it was inside a building, so it could only be approximate. And then for when we got into the cars, they built on a soundstage an exact replica of the Wonder Wheel car. And one by one, they filmed us in the car doing our dialogue with everybody else off camera talking to us. And they built this huge scaffolding that we climbed up the back of. You were afraid of heights. You would have been out of luck that day, where it looked like we were looking down from the Wonder Wheel. And I was so astonished when I saw it all put together. It was magical. And it looked, Coney Island, you know, transformed into the 50s, where it's not dangerous or full of trash. It's just a beautiful, magical place. It was the most fun day. It was so delightful. It was just great. And I thought, I've never seen anything like that on television when I saw it. Thought it was amazing.
Would you say that's one of the most extravagant sequences that you've been part of on this show?
Absolutely, by far. And did you see there were so many people there? There were all of, you have to remember that during the pandemic, every time you have an extra, that's somebody that has to be tested and vetted and masked, and we all had to be really careful of each other. And so they went to all of that trouble, when we were told we were going to come back to start filming season 4. The pandemic had hit, and first we were going to start in September, then it was going to be November, then it was going to be right after the holidays. It just kept being pushed. And I'm thinking to myself, what are they going to do? Because, hardly anybody was back to work, and things felt very dangerous in New York at the time in terms of the virus. This was pre-vaccine. There were no vaccines. And I thought, well, I guess they're going to make the show much smaller. It'll be people talking in the kitchen, sitting on a bed, it'll be much more intimate. And I read the first script, and it's the Wonder Wheel. And I thought, wow, they're really going to pull this off. And they really did. And Amy and Dan were very clear that the nature of the show would not confine itself to talking heads in a kitchen. They were not going to do that. They were going to make the show that they've always been making. And it just is, it's such a blessing. It's such a blessing.
Yeah, and it's definitely true. I think this season with the burlesque, there's more ensemble pieces than ever before.
I know, and huge, right? Huge amounts of people. When you think about what we've all had to go through, and for the entire season, not one person came down with a virus. They took such good care of us. With all of those people there, hundreds of people it takes, as you can imagine, to make a television show of this scope. So
Right.
they did a great job of taking care of us, and also delivering to the audience a really spectacular show.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I do appreciate some of your more well-known co-stars. I'd love to just talk about them briefly. Let's start with Kevin, who plays Moish. He's so funny. He's great. And what does he like to work with?
I had done a movie with Kevin before, so when they told me I was going to be married to Kevin, I cannot tell you how thrilled I was. Also, he gave me recently, I don't think it's new, an autobiography that he wrote that is really about his history in the world of comedy, and it is so great. And I recommend it to anybody who wants to read more about him. But one of the things that's so interesting about playing opposite Kevin, besides the fact that he's not only a great actor, he's a great actor as well as a great comic, but he knows this world. So we were doing a scene in the Catskills, and there was a comedian that closed the show, and he was doing his routine, and Kevin said, that's a real person. He knows like a lot of times they will buy the material of real comics that may not be household names to us, but that if you really are an expert at this world, Kevin knows everything about stand-up comedy, its evolution, how it came from the Catskills. Like, I didn't even know about the Catskills till we went there. I grew up in the South. I never heard of it. And he said, if you were an aspiring comic, being a waiter at the Catskills was like going to graduate school. That's all you wanted to do. That every major comic came through there. And I had no idea. Every major comic, and the NBA. The NBA had basketball practice there in the summer, which is just so remarkable. And all the hotels are gone.
I know.
Down. So sad. I wish they were back.
Yeah, wow. And what about Michael? He's a lot of fun as Joel.
He's my, I have a son, Benjamin, and when we had the premiere a year or so ago, I took a picture of Michael and Ben standing next to each other because I went, now I have two sons. He's so funny and so open and just, it's when you work with these kind of people, it's like this is the greatest group of actors. You are always being challenged and supported at the same time. It's really true. I know when people do interviews, they say stuff like this and you never believe it because, who would? But I really promise you, I even asked the creators who are obviously so brilliant at writing and directing, did they also cast chemistry? Were they secretly aware of what a family this was going to become? I don't know if they were. They might claim that, but I think they just lucked out too. But I've known Tony Shalhoub for 40 years. Tony and I've done many things together. So he wasn't new to me, and Kevin wasn't new to me. Michael and Rachel and Alex and Marin were new to me, but now, they're lifers, whether they like it or not. They're in my life. They're in my life for life.
And a question I always like to ask is there anybody on the show, any character or actor that you wish you had the opportunity to work with, but Shirley would just never be in that world or that scene?
Well, certainly Jane Lynch playing Sophie Lennon. Shirley didn't get a chance to spend time with her, but she had those dogs and she had a lot of servants. And I think, Shirley is upwardly mobile. She would like to live like that. So I think Shirley would have really enjoyed being with Sophie Lennon, although their paths never crossed. I was thinking about it the other day and I thought, I wonder if Shirley's ever been to see stand-up comedy. Probably not. And I don't think she would I don't know if she would like Lenny Bruce. Maybe, maybe not. He might be a little too irreverent for Shirley. I mean, I love him, as I'm sure the audience does too, and I love Luke. But I think that might be outside Shirley's purview. Why is that funny? She'd say, why is that funny? I don't think that's funny.
I like that. I'm sure that's true. And this is the first time that the show has been spread out over the course of a couple of weeks. The previous seasons all launched at once. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm the same way the audience is. On one hand, we all decided to watch it when the audience watched it. We didn't watch it in advance. And so after the first two, I went, oh, I don't like this. I want them all to be here. But I would have watched it all in a day and a half. And I think that they decided that, Dan said something that was so interesting and I didn't think about it. He said, the show is so dense. It's not meant to be gobbled up the way it had been being gobbled. And right before the season was coming on, my husband rewatched the first 3 seasons and he kept saying, I can't believe I missed that. And I missed that. And I missed that. There's so much to see. So I think what they wanted was for the audience to have a chance in between to look forward to it and then really take it in, a little at a time. I don't like it because I'm miss instant gratification. So I wish it was here all now, but I'm excited about tonight. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night.
Well, I always think back, The Sopranos for me was the first show that I really watched that I felt was every episode felt like a movie. And yes, it was nice that it was spread out. And HBO, of course, is still doing that. But this show, even though it is a comedy, has felt most like that always since that every episode ends and it's not a cliffhanger. You're eagerly anticipating what's next only because you want more, but you don't need more. It feels satisfying and contained in its own. And while you obviously need to watch every episode to understand what's going on, right, one episode is sort of enough to satiate in some ways.
Amy told me when they sent me the pilot, and I was so astonished. I'd never seen anything that had such largesse and the production values and the acting. It was just so gorgeous. And she said, they told me to make it like a movie. And so I did. And it does feel like we're making like 8 little movies. It does. 8 or 9 movies every, couple of weeks. It really does feel like that. It is so elaborate. And, last season when they had the USO show, they had 800 extras to dress in period costumes. So it's not a green screen. It's not computer generated. It's all humans. And so there is something about that is really thrilling.
Yeah. And the announcement, of course, recently was that there is only one more season after this. Is it bittersweet to know the show is ending, or do you feel like it's been a pretty solid run?
It's been a pretty solid run, and it's heartbreaking because we would do it forever and ever and ever. But, these writers are too talented and too classy to stay too long at the fair. And I should have known that from the very beginning. They are, somebody said, and I have no idea how they're going to do it. I know they must have, from the very first time they created this, had an ending in mind. How would you what would be the conclusion to this? So I have no idea how they're going to land this plane, none whatsoever. But somebody pointed out to me that the last show of beloved series almost always is a disappointment. Nobody's ever pulled that off. Like everybody was very disappointed by The Sopranos last episode. Remember, it was like, there are so many shows like that. I think MASH was like that. Shows that you fall in love with and you go, this is the end. And people really look forward to that last episode. So they've got a big challenge in front of them because, people will let you know if you didn't end it to their satisfaction. You know that. I remember David Chase defending the end of The Sopranos, trying to say over and over again, no, this is how we ended it this way. Breaking Bad, there were lots of them. So this is a particular challenge for creators of what is in Seinfeld's last episode, people were not happy with. Maybe people just aren't happy with things they love end. That's probably what it is.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you? What else are you working on and what do you want to do after this?
Well, what I'm doing, we have a hiatus week while they put together those brilliant sets and costumes. And I'm going for my very first trip to Tel Aviv to shoot a TV series there for a week. So I'm very excited about that. That's a new comedy that's coming out of Israel that has 2 American characters, and they will be me and Henry Winkler. So I'm so excited because I've never been to Israel and I've always wanted to go. This won't really be my trip because we'll be working there and I have to come right back from Maisel. And then after this is over, I'll be bereft and I don't know. I mean, there will be things, but this is a tough act to follow. I have to say, this is not coming around again so soon. I mean, when you think about television, there's so much content out there and there's so much great content out there, but there's nothing like this. So I'm going to have to just see what reveals itself.
Well, that show sounds pretty interesting. Is that something that will be coming to American audiences or is that an Israeli production?
No idea. It's in English and Hebrew. There's a few Israeli series that we have watched during the pandemic. I don't know if you did. I think a lot of people were watching Fauda, Shtisel. These are Israeli series, and maybe it will be picked up by an American network. I have no idea, none whatsoever. I've never seen an Israeli comedy broadcast for American audiences, but we'll see. Hope so.
Wonderful. Well, it's been so wonderful to get to speak to you and hear about this and your perspective and everything. I'm really looking forward to that other show. But in the meantime, more of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel every Friday. So thank you so much, Caroline.
Thank you. And you take good care. Thanks, Abe.